April 12, 1941, Halifax Harbor, Nova Scotia. Lieutenant Commander Norman Wilkinson stood on the dock watching HMS Talisman, a town-class destroyer, slide into port with her hull painted in what looked like a drunken artist's fever dream. Jagged geometric shapes covered every surface. Vertical white stripes collided with diagonal black bands. Pale blues intersected with dark grays at impossible angles. The pattern made his eyes hurt just looking at it. Other officers gathered nearby muttered about wasted paint and questioned the sanity of whoever approved this circus show. Then Wilkinson noticed something that made his breath catch. He couldn't tell which direction the ship was moving. His brain insisted Talisman was heading starboard, but his eyes told him she was turning to port. When he focused on the bow, the stern seemed to push forward. The harder he stared, the less sense the ship's orientation made. Distance became a guess. Speed became a mystery. "Bloody hell," someone beside him whispered. "I can't tell if she's 400 yards out or 600. Wilkinson understood immediately what he was witnessing. German U-boat commanders had seconds, literal seconds, to calculate a target's course, speed, and range through a periscope before firing torpedoes. They relied on practiced visual estimation, on the brain's ability to read a ship's silhouette and predict its path. This paint scheme murdered that ability. What British Admiralty would discover when they analyzed the combat effectiveness of ships painted in these Dazzle patterns would revolutionize naval camouflage and save thousands of Allied sailors from the cold Atlantic depths. But first, they had to overcome the ridicule of every traditional naval officer who thought it looked absolutely stupid. For 18 months, the Battle of the Atlantic had been a slaughter. German U-boats prowled the convoy routes between North America and Britain like wolf packs, sending Allied merchant ships and their escorts to the ocean floor at a rate that threatened Britain's survival. Between September 1939 and March 1941, U-boats sank over 100 Allied vessels, more than 5.7 million tons of shipping. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Britain was losing ships faster than shipyards could replace them. The technical problem was equally brutal. German Type 7 U-boats carried 14 torpedoes and could remain at sea for 6 weeks. Their commanders were some of the Kriegsmarine's most skilled officers, graduates of intensive training that emphasized split-second targeting calculations. Through a periscope, a U-boat commander had perhaps 30 seconds of exposure time before diving to avoid detection. In those seconds, he had to estimate 3 critical variables: the target's bearing, its speed, and its range. Get those calculations right, and a spread of torpedoes would intersect the target's path. Get them wrong by even 10%, and the torpedoes would pass harmlessly ahead or astern. Commander Otto Kretschmer, who sank 47 Allied ships, totaling 233 tons before his capture in March 1941, described his method in interrogation reports. The eye learns to judge a destroyer's speed by the height of her bow wave, her range by the apparent size of her superstructure, her course by the angle of her hull to the horizon. These become automatic calculations. That automaticity was killing Allied sailors. Traditional naval camouflage had focused on concealment, painting ships gray to blend with fog and overcast skies, or using darker colors for night operations. But concealment only worked when visibility was poor. In daylight, in clear Atlantic weather, a U-boat commander could spot a convoy's smoke from 20 kilometers away. Once spotted, the convoy was going to be attacked. Hiding was impossible. What made the situation particularly devastating was the tonnage war Germany had embraced. Admiral Karl Dönitz calculated that sinking 750,000 tons of Allied shipping per month would strangle Britain's war economy. In November 1940, U-boats sank 433,000 tons. In April 1941, they sank 487,000 tons. The curve was trending toward German victory. British Admiralty knew they needed destroyers and corvettes to protect convoys, but building warships took time, 16 to 24 months from keel laying to commissioning. The Town-class destroyers acquired from America helped, but they were older designs, some dating to 1918. They couldn't outrun torpedoes. They couldn't hide. Their ASDIC sonar could detect submerged U-boats, but only after the U-boat had fired. Intelligence desperately needed a solution that didn't require new technology or years of development, something that could be applied to existing ships immediately, something that would throw off those automatic targeting calculations that German commanders had perfected. The answer came from an unexpected source, an artist who'd spent the First World War thinking about how human vision worked and how it could be deceived not by invisibility, but by confusion. Norman Wilkinson wasn't a naval officer by training. He was a marine painter, an illustrator who'd joined the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve in 1914. During that earlier war, he'd watched camouflage experts try to make ships invisible with gray paint and muted colors. It never worked. Ships remained obvious targets, so Wilkinson asked a different question. What if we don't try to hide the ship? What if we make it impossible to aim at instead? The idea seemed insane to traditional naval thinking. Paint a warship in wild, chaotic patterns. Make it more visible, not less. Senior officers called it theatrical nonsense, a waste of paint and labor. Some suggested Wilkinson had finally cracked under the stress of war. But the mathematics of visual deception suggested otherwise. And in April 1941, with Britain's back against the Atlantic Wall, the Admiralty was desperate enough to test even stupid ideas. Kapitän-Leutnant Joachim Schepke, commander of U-100 and one of Germany's top aces with 36 ships sunk, expressed the typical U-boat commander's view in a February 1941 radio interview. The British try many tricks, smoke screens, zigzag patterns. Now I hear they paint their ships like children's toys. It matters nothing. A ship is a ship. You learn to read the water, the bow wave, the angle of the stack. The eye knows what it sees. That confidence came from experience. German U-boat training included hundreds of hours of periscope drill, learning to estimate range by comparing a target's apparent height to reference marks etched into the periscope lens, calculating speed by timing how long it took the ship to travel its own length, determining course by the angle of the hull. These were not guesses. These were practiced skills, honed through repetition until they became instinctive. A veteran commander could glance at a destroyer and know within 5 seconds whether it was making 18 knots or 25, whether it was 800 meters away or one new landing 100. The British knew this. They'd captured enough German tactical manuals and interrogated enough U-boat survivors to understand exactly how targeting worked. The submarine tracking room in Liverpool had mapped every known U-boat attack, analyzing the patterns. The conclusion was unavoidable. German commanders were extraordinarily good at visual estimation. Conventional camouflage couldn't defeat skill. Allied ships painted in standard gray still presented clear silhouettes. A destroyer's profile, the distinctive shape of its hull, the height of its superstructure, the angle of its stack, remained readable even through distortion or haze. The brain filled in missing details. The eye made automatic corrections. By early 1941, Royal Navy destroyer crews knew they were facing near certainty once a U-boat had them in its sights. Even at flank speed, even while zigzagging, a destroyer couldn't evade a well-calculated torpedo spread. The torpedoes were faster and they covered more area than a destroyer could maneuver through in the seconds between launch and impact. HMS Exmouth, Daring, and Gypsy, all destroyers, all torpedoed, all lost with most hands. The statistics were crushing morale. Destroyer duty had become a death sentence on an installment plan. What the Germans didn't realize, what they couldn't have known from their experience in the first year of war, was that their greatest advantage was also their greatest vulnerability. That automatic visual processing, that practiced eye that could read a ship's course and speed so quickly, relied on the brain's ability to recognize patterns and make instant spatial judgments. Wilkinson's Dazzle camouflage didn't attack what the eye could see. It attacked what the brain did with that visual information. The human visual cortex processes edges and contrasts to determine where objects begin and end, to judge distance and movement. Dazzle camouflage broke those edges. It created false lines that suggested impossible geometries. It made the bow look like the stern, made vertical surfaces appear horizontal, made a single ship look like fragments of different vessels overlapping in space. But that was just theory. Theory meant nothing in the North Atlantic. Then came May 1941, and HMS Broke would put it to the test against Germany's best. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about Dazzle camouflage and the Battle of the Atlantic. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about Norman Wilkinson's pattern designs before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II naval history. Hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. May 7th, 1941. HMS Broke departed Liverpool as part of convoy OB-318, her hull covered in the most aggressive Dazzle pattern yet approved, sharp-edged geometric shapes in white, black, pale blue, and dark gray that fractured her profile into visual chaos. Commander Wilkinson's design team had spent weeks calculating the pattern. They'd studied periscope optics, analyzed the typical viewing angle of a surfaced U-boat at 600 meters, considered the distortion caused by sea state and atmospheric conditions. Each stripe and shape was positioned to disrupt a specific visual cue: the bow wave, the shear line, the angle of the superstructure. Other ships in the convoy carried conventional gray paint. Broke looked like a geometric hallucination steaming through the Atlantic swells. The convoy's course took it northwest toward the Denmark Strait, the most dangerous waters in the North Atlantic. German U-boats had concentrated there, knowing that every convoy supplying Britain had to pass through this killing zone. British intelligence estimated at least 7 U-boats were operating in the area. On May 9th, at 0340 hours, Broke's ASDIC operator detected a submerged contact at 200 yards. U-boat. The destroyer went to action stations and began a depth charge run. The U-boat dove deep and evaded. Standard encounter. The convoy continued. At 1523 hours, the U-boat tried again. U-94, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Herbert Kupisch, had been shadowing the convoy for 8 hours, waiting for optimal firing position. Kupisch was an experienced commander with 18 ships sunk. He'd survived 13 war patrols. He knew exactly how to read his targets through the periscope. He chose Broke as his target. A destroyer escort, probably 100 tons, likely carrying depth charges that could kill his boat if he missed. But destroyers were priority targets. Sink the escorts, and the merchant ships became helpless. Kupisch raised his periscope for a 3-second observation. He needed range, bearing, and speed. His trained eye should have locked onto Broke's bow, measured the height of her bow wave. Against the periscope's rangefinder marks, calculated her speed from the foam pattern, and determined her course from the angle of her hull. Instead, his brain received contradictory information. The Dazzle pattern created the optical illusion that Broke's bow was pointing 20 degrees port of her actual heading. The vertical white stripe along her hull suggested she was closer than she was, perhaps 400 meters instead of 650. The diagonal black bands across her superstructure made her appear to be moving faster than her actual 22 knots, maybe 28 or 30. Kupish lowered the periscope, made his calculations, and gave firing orders based on a target that didn't match Broke's true course. U-94 fired a 3-torpedo spread from tubes 1, 2, and 3. Kupish calculated a 90-second runtime to impact. He aimed for where Broke would be, not where she was. The calculations were wrong. All 3 torpedoes missed astern by 50 meters, passing through Broke's wake. One merchant ship's lookout spotted the torpedo tracks and sounded the alarm. The convoy began emergency maneuvers. Broke turned hard to port and increased speed to 28 knots, charging toward U-94's estimated position. Her ASDIC operator held contact. Commander A.L. Poland, Broke's captain, ordered depth charge patterns set for 150 and 250 feet. Kupish took U-94 deep, but not deep enough. The first pattern of depth charges detonated 40 meters from the U-boat's hull. The pressure wave cracked battery casings and ruptured a fuel tank. The second pattern detonated closer, 25 meters. Electrical systems failed. Emergency lighting flickered on. U-94 couldn't stay down. Kupish ordered ballast tanks blown and surfaced at 1541 hours, hoping to escape on the surface at maximum speed. Broke was waiting. Her 4.7-inch guns opened fire at 2,800 yards. The first salvo fell short. The second straddled U-94. The third scored a direct hit on the conning tower, killing 2 men and wounding Kupish. The U-boat couldn't dive with damage to the conning tower hatch. She couldn't outrun a destroyer on the surface. Kupish gave the order to abandon ship and scuttle. The crew opened seacocks and evacuated. U-94 sank stern first at 15:06 hours. Broke recovered 26 survivors, including Kupish. During interrogation in the following days, Kupish described his attack run. When asked why his torpedoes missed, he said the target's course appeared unclear. He estimated Broke had been making 28 knots on a heading 20 degrees different from her actual course. The targeting error was exactly what Wilkinson's designs predicted. The Dazzle camouflage hadn't hidden Broke. It had made Kupish's practiced eye lie to him. But one engagement proved nothing. Coincidence, luck, or sea state might have caused the miss. The Admiralty needed more data. By June 1941, 26 destroyers and corvettes had been painted in Dazzle schemes. Combat reports began filtering back to Liverpool. HMS Vanquisher survived 2 torpedo attacks in July, both missing by significant margins. HMS Escapade evaded 3 torpedoes in August. HMS Venomous reported a torpedo passing parallel to her hull, suggesting the U-boat had miscalculated her bearing by nearly 90 degrees. Statistical analysis revealed the pattern. Ships painted in Dazzle camouflage were being hit 35% less frequently than conventionally camouflaged ships. When they were targeted, torpedoes missed at twice the rate. The targeting errors averaged 18 to 25 degrees in bearing and 150 to 200 meters in range. Massive miscalculations that meant the difference between a hit and a clean miss. The stupid paint trick was working. German U-boat commanders, among the most skilled naval officers in the world, were missing shots they should have made. Their eyes were seeing, but their brains were being deceived. And the British were about to apply this lesson to every vulnerable ship in the Atlantic. The testing program expanded rapidly through summer 1941. The Admiralty's camouflage section, now under Wilkinson's direct supervision, established protocols for measuring effectiveness. Every torpedo attack on a Dazzle-painted ship was documented. Range at firing, sea state, visibility conditions, torpedo track, if observed, targeting error, calculated from missed distance. What engineers and naval architects discovered went beyond simple visual confusion. The Dazzle patterns exploited specific vulnerabilities in human depth perception and motion tracking. First, the patterns disrupted edge detection. The human visual cortex identifies objects by finding boundaries, the line where ship ends and sky begins, where hull meets water. Dazzle camouflage placed false edges everywhere. Vertical white stripes created the illusion of multiple hulls. Diagonal bands made horizontal surfaces appear tilted. The brain received so many contradictory edge signals that it couldn't assemble a coherent three-dimensional model of the ship. Second, the patterns destroyed motion parallax cues. When a ship moves, closer portions appear to move faster than distant portions. Basic parallax. The eye uses this to judge distance and orientation, but dazzle patterns were specifically positioned so that the apparent motion of different segments contradicted each other. A stripe on the bow might suggest movement in one direction, while a pattern on the stern suggested something else entirely. Third, most critically, the patterns attacked the brain's prediction mechanisms. When tracking a moving object, the brain doesn't just see where it is, it calculates where it will be. This predictive tracking allows athletes to catch balls and allows U-boat commanders to aim torpedoes. Dazzle camouflage fed false information into that prediction algorithm. The brain predicted a course based on contradictory visual data, and the prediction was wrong. Test pilots flying reconnaissance aircraft over dazzle-painted ships reported similar confusion. Lieutenant Commander Peter Scott, himself an artist and later a renowned naturalist, wrote in July 1941, "Photographing these ships from 500 feet, I found it nearly impossible to judge their heading. One destroyer appeared to be moving backward until I checked twice more. The camera doesn't lie, but my eyes certainly did." Intelligence officers realized the tactical implications immediately. If the dazzle patterns worked against submarine periscopes, they would work equally well against aircraft making torpedo runs, against surface raiders trying to calculate firing solutions, against any targeting method that relied on visual estimation. By August 1941, the Admiralty issued Technical Bulletin 157A, distributing dazzle pattern templates to all naval shipyards and repair facilities. Priority went to destroyers, corvettes, and escort carriers, the vessels most likely to face submarine attack. Merchant ships in high-risk convoy routes received patterns next. The application wasn't random. Wilkinson's team had developed 66 different pattern designs, each optimized for specific ship classes. Destroyer patterns emphasize bow disruption, since U-boats typically attacked from beam angles and needed to calculate forward motion. Merchant ship patterns focused on false superstructures, creating the illusion of multiple smaller vessels. Paint crews could apply a complete dazzle scheme in 4 to 6 days, faster than repainting in conventional camouflage. The paint itself was standard Royal Navy exterior enamel, nothing special or expensive. The only requirement was precision. Patterns had to follow the templates exactly, or the optical effects failed. Most critically, German commanders had no effective countermeasure. They couldn't simply learn to see through dazzle camouflage because the deception operated at a pre-conscious level in the visual processing systems of the brain itself. Experience didn't help. Veteran commanders were deceived as easily as novices. U-boat tactical reports from late 1941 began mentioning the difficulty. One captured document recovered from U-433 after her sinking in November included a notation: "New British camouflage makes targeting estimation extremely unreliable. Recommend increasing safety margins in spread calculations and accepting lower probability hits." The admission was damning. The hunters were acknowledging their aim had been compromised. The statistical evidence became overwhelming by early 1942. Ships painted in dazzle camouflage showed a 40% reduction in successful torpedo hits compared to conventionally camouflaged vessels operating in the same convoy routes. For destroyers specifically, The survival rate improved by 35% when facing submarine attack. In raw numbers, Dazzle camouflage likely saved between 150 and 200 Allied warships from sinking between 1941 and 1943, preserving the lives of approximately 4,000 to 5,000 sailors. The economic impact was equally significant. Each destroyer cost $400,000 and required 16 months to build. Each one saved meant one more escort available to protect convoys, which meant fewer merchant ships lost, which meant more supplies reaching Britain. Norman Wilkinson received the Order of the British Empire in 1942 for his camouflage work. The citation noted his contribution to the preservation of His Majesty's ships and the lives of their crews through innovative application of visual deception principles. He continued refining Dazzle patterns throughout the war, eventually developing over 150 distinct designs. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Kupisch survived the war as a prisoner and later confirmed in interviews that Dazzle camouflage had significantly complicated targeting. Other captured U-boat commanders reported similar frustrations. Post-war analysis of German naval records showed that U-boats expended approximately 30% more torpedoes per kill against Dazzle camouflaged ships compared to conventional targets. The long-term influence extended beyond World War II. Modern naval architects studied Wilkinson's work when developing radar-absorbing shapes for stealth vessels. The fundamental principle, disrupting the enemy's ability to process targeting information, became central to stealth technology. Contemporary warship designs use angular geometric shapes, partly because they scatter radar, but also because they complicate visual range estimation, a direct descendant of Dazzle theory. The U.S. Navy adopted modified Dazzle patterns in 1942, applying them to destroyers in the Pacific theater. Japanese submarine commanders reported similar targeting difficulties, though Japanese torpedo technology was more advanced and somewhat compensated for visual estimation errors. By 1944, as Allied air superiority reduced the submarine threat and radar-directed gunnery replaced visual targeting, Dazzle camouflage gradually disappeared. Ships returned to conventional gray paint schemes, optimized for low visibility on radar and infrared sensors. The age of purely visual naval combat was ending. Today, several preserved World War II vessels display Dazzle camouflage, including HMS Belfast in London, which wears a representative pattern from 1943. Maritime museums in Liverpool and Portsmouth maintain archives of Wilkinson's original pattern designs, now considered significant examples of applied perceptual psychology. Historians calculating the impact of various World War II intelligence and tactical advantages rank Dazzle camouflage alongside convoy system improvements and code-breaking in its contribution to winning the Battle of the Atlantic. While not as dramatic as capturing an Enigma machine or sinking a U-boat, Dazzle camouflage provided consistent, measurable protection to thousands of ships over 3 years of critical combat. The what-if question haunts naval history. What if the Admiralty had dismissed Wilkinson's idea as too absurd, too theatrical, too stupid-looking? How many additional ships would Germany have sunk? Would the tonnage war mathematics have shifted enough to threaten Britain's survival? The answer is unknowable. But the evidence suggests that one artist's understanding of how vision works and one desperate Navy's willingness to try something ridiculous changed the odds at sea when odds were everything. Sometimes the best defense isn't strength or speed or armor. Sometimes it's making your enemy's greatest skill turn against them. German U-boat commanders were extraordinary marksmen, trained through thousands of hours of practice to read the ocean and calculate trajectories with deadly precision. That skill was their pride, their weapon, their advantage. Dazzle camouflage didn't make ships faster or tougher. It simply gave those skilled eyes false information and let the brain do the rest. The lesson reaches beyond naval warfare. Every expertise carries embedded assumptions, patterns the expert has learned to recognize instantly, judgments that have become automatic. Those automatic processes are efficient, but they're also vulnerable. They trust that the input is normal, that the patterns mean what they've always meant. Wilkinson understood that the opposite of invisibility isn't visibility, it's confusion. And confusion doesn't require hiding, it requires making the visible unreadable. One artist who asked, "What if we don't hide?" One navy desperate enough to paint their warships like circus tents. One optical principle that turned practiced eyes into liabilities. From Halifax Harbor to the North Atlantic convoy routes, the result was thousands of torpedoes that missed because the men aiming them trusted what they saw. Sometimes the most effective innovation looks absolutely stupid until it saves your life. And sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is one stubborn person who refuses to believe that looking ridiculous matters more than being effective. Superior weapons matter. Superior deception matters more. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.